Hello and welcome to the 4th devlog for my spell-based roguelike. In the last episode, I showed you guys all the abilities I made for the game and also touched on how I wanted to make sure that players can make different builds and express their creativity when playing. I'm really happy with the reception of that video and you guys brought up some very valuable points and suggestions, so thank you so much for that. In this video, I'll go over some of your feedback as well as some other changes that I wanted to cover for a long time. So, without further ado, here are all the things that I did during the past month of April. In the first week, I picked up the stages rework. As I mentioned last time, the old ones had a lot of issues. Mainly the fact that players can just run in circles and shoot, evading all damage and clearing the levels at the same time. That being said, the first thing I wanted to focus on was art and aesthetics. I wanted to figure out what the perfect vibe and environment would be, as that would give me a better idea of what I wanted the stage to represent. After some exploration, I decided to stay on the dungeon aesthetic, so I redesigned my walls, assigned the correct colors, and had a tile set ready to be used. The tile editor in Unreal is among the very few quote-unquote experimental 2D features that the engine has. I say quote-unquote as that feature has been experimental for quite a bit some time now, and as far as I'm aware, there haven't been any plans on changing that in the near future. But I honestly can't complain. It does the job for me as it allows me to quickly draw out a level, which I then set up in my stage editor that I made a while back. This editor allows me to set the position of every stage element, so when the stage loads, these elements will take their respective spots. So, big surprise, you never actually move forward through different areas, you're being set back to your starting point, and all the doors, spawn locations, and player collisions are being moved around you to fit that stage. Within a week, I managed to make 3 new stages. A small one, medium, and large. The small one has a bunch of tight corridors that actually change how I play the game drastically, as one wrong move would usually lead to me taking big amounts of damage. The medium one felt pretty good. It doesn't allow the player to take laps around the map, mainly thanks to the enemy spawn locations and the fact that you can't shoot through walls, and the spike traps also require you to occasionally dash and estimate your new position. The big one feels quite spacious. It allows you to freely move around, but thanks to the spikes it still forces you to stay alert of your surroundings. Overall, I'm really happy with how these changes turned out. Also, let me know what you think of the aesthetic. I'm looking for a dungeon vibe, but if you got any other suggestions or ideas that I could try, definitely let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your opinions. I got many more stage designs planned, so the content and diversity of the game will significantly increase in the upcoming weeks. In the second week, I picked up another big task. For a while now, every time I play and engage with lots of enemies, I started experiencing huge lag spikes and freeze frames. Reason for that was spawning. But what am I spawning so much, you may ask? Well, let me give you a sneak peek on how my code is set up. Since I am making a 2D pixel art game, all my characters, spells and VFX are sprites that I combine to make flipbooks. However, since Unreal doesn't have a proper way of spawning those flipbooks, I had to make them into blueprints and spawn those blueprints when needed. This means that every time a blood effect, damage number, or a player ability needs to be created, the game allocates memory for it, which happens to be a very time-consuming and resource-intensive process, particularly when many objects need to be created and destroyed rapidly, as in my case with all those flipbooks. To fix this, I used the method called object pooling. In game development, object pooling is a technique used to optimize the performance of games by reusing objects that have already been created. Instead of creating and destroying these objects on the fly, we can create a pool of those objects at the beginning of the game or level, and then reuse them as needed throughout the game. When an object is no longer needed, instead of destroying it, the object is returned to the pool where it can be reused later. That being said, I made my own object pooling system by spawning 30 of each actor that would usually spawn during combat, and then making a small manager in the game mode that will determine where and when these actors will appear and disappear. As expected, it worked out perfectly. And not only is the lag during combat completely gone, but I can reuse this system for enemy spawning too, to further make sure the game will run without any issues on any computer. So if you happen to be rapidly creating objects in your game and experience lag spikes, you know what to do. In my third week, I decided to do some art improvements. Art inconsistency has been the main feedback I got on my last video, and very much understandably so. Somewhere along the development, I got in the bad habit of scaling my art to my desired size. not paying attention to the fact that I'm playing around with pixel sizes. Due to that, some effects appear bigger and less detailed than others. This was very noticeable in the flamethrower ability, as I scaled that one 6 times its original size, making its pixels way bigger than it should be. Another issue with my art was color inconsistency. I've been learning color theory on the go while working on the projects, and some time ago picked up a color palette to use for all my art. That means some of my old art that is still in the game will logically feel out of place, as it isn't in the same color spectrum as the rest. That being said, I sat down and made a list with all these things that needed an iteration and started working on them one by one. One of those things were the visuals on every player character. Since I made those back in December, their color, outline and animations were all outdated and very much needed a refresh. To fix them, I colored them with the new palette, gave them a darker, more apparent outline, and added some more interesting animations to their run cycle. I also colored the wind character in green, as his purple color was not matching the aesthetic of his spells, unlike all the other characters. It might take some time to get used to his new look, but I like it a lot already. All these changes made the characters feel more alive, noticeable, and overall fun to control. Aside from these changes, I fixed up the flamethrower particle by increasing the sprite size naturally and adding more details to some areas, and went over some of the other effects such as the wind dash and the mind blaze, as those needed a refresh the most. Moving forward, I'll be occasionally updating the rest of the spells as well as some other art elements to make sure it's all consistent and feels in place. In the final week, I got to do some small game polish. I wanted to add improvements to the second-to-second game loop, aka the enemy combat, so I added a damage bar to all health bars in the game to give more emphasis when dealing a ton of damage, and also make the enemies wobble a bit when hit to add more feedback on successful hits. After that, I played a bit with the player camera, upping the camera shake frequency and making it follow your mouse to a certain extent, allowing the player to aim better in the direction that they're looking at. These changes, rather small, felt very much right in place, so I'll continue to add more of them in the future. I really want to make sure the combat feels fun on its own, as that will mean the players will be engaged with the game at all times. And with that being said, these are all the changes from this past month. A bit of an all over the place vlog, but all those fixes and iterations were very much necessary before I get to add more new stuff like the augments I mentioned in the last video. As I mentioned earlier, thank you so much for the comments in the previous video. Keep the feedback going. I'm reading each and every point you guys are making, and it's helping me a ton with figuring out what is the best for the game. As always, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one.